Morning, everybody. My name is Brad. If I've not had a chance to meet you, I'm sorry for that. I wish we could meet. Maybe we will in the plaza after the service today. In the last 6 weeks or so, each weekend, we have about 130 or so more people with us each weekend than we had at the end of last year. And while that's wonderful, and we're grateful for everybody who would come and see what our church family is about, our aim is actually not to grow our attendance. Our aim is to help people belong and to find a place, a community where they can increasingly grow in their understanding of Jesus and maybe even begin to think increasingly like him, so that in the world around us, we would all be mistaken for Jesus, because we have a world that admires him, but we don't always know him. And one of the ways they can is through us. And so if you're new to Copper Hills, we put a sheet of paper in the chair flap in front of you. You can write some notes on it. But if you want to, you can also put your name, and that's a way of identifying yourself. And if you take it to our guest center folks at the back, they will make sure it gets to our office. We'd like to send you a gift, and we also add you to a list of folks that will get a weekly newsletter just highlighting the events that are happening at Copper Hills. We don't do a lot of public service announcements. Have you noticed that? We really rely on the electronics to get that to everybody. So if that's of interest to you, I just wanted to mention that. I want to dive right in this morning to a passage of Scripture that's a challenging passage of Scripture for a teacher to teach, but also for us to sit and listen to. It's something that's often widely misunderstood by the female part of our culture, and in many ways a struggle for the male side of our culture. So where am I going with that? I hope that created some intrigue. Sitting on the front of your seat right now, where is he going with this? So here's what we started a series that we call Think Differently. And really what it is, it's a look at one of Jesus' most famous sermons, if in fact it's a sermon, not a culmination of thoughts, whatever it is. It's a strategic series of teachings that were really central and deep in Jesus' thinking. And as he does with many parts of what we know as the Sermon on the Mount, he'll introduce something like, you've heard it said, or this is how you think, but I think differently. And people would listen to what he had to say. Now, it might surprise you, maybe not, that we may not exactly think about these things that Jesus is thinking about, that he encourages his fellow citizens to think about in new ways. We may not think of them exactly like he does either. And so the hope would be that as we go through this series of teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, if you will, that we would actually think about our thinking and align it with Jesus' thinking and see if there is a difference in that. So, we finished off last week, verse 26, talking about anger, and I'll mention a little bit of the process of that. Trev did such a fantastic job introducing that to us last week. I want to pick up in verse 27, read it to you, and you'll get why this is a bit of a challenging passage. It starts this way in verse 27. You have heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. Okay, but I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. But I say, anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already done that. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And this makes perfect sense. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Good, right? Nothing controversial there. It should be a fun morning. So I want to start this way. Sometimes tone matters almost as much as content. And I want you to know that my tone this morning is meant to be pastoral and caring and sensitive, but also to be direct and truth-filled. What I would like to do, if Jesus would enable by his Spirit, to teach this with the same tone and heart that he had for those that were listening to him that day. I in no way suggest that I'm anything close like to him. But if I could communicate on his behalf the way he would. I would sure like to do that. So at first glance, what makes this subject so intriguing is that the subject matter appears to be about human sexuality and the appropriateness of expressing that within a certain set of boundaries. Evidently, and we might all agree with this, adultery crosses a line. Could we agree on that? So what's adultery? Where's the line? So it might be easy to state, but with varying ideas that fit within the adultery definition creates no matter of small confusion for our culture, and even for us in our church. So let's work through what Jesus says here, kind of line by line, in sequence, because there's a sequence that matters here to how Jesus is teaching it, and see how he thinks about this subject matter. So back to verse 27. You have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. This, as I said earlier, is a typical way that rabbis would teach in their day. They would take a common statement that everybody knew and say, this is what you know to be true. Let me explain why that's true, or explain why that's not true, or its understanding is generally accepted as different than what it was intended. This is Jesus' idea. He says, do not commit adultery. Now, you may be familiar with that as Jesus' culture was. This is Article 7 of the Ten Commandments. Right? Right. Last week we looked at Article 6, you must not murder. And Jesus is building a similar argument to what Trevor presented last week as it relates to anger. And basically it was this: murder is wrong, but you don't just show up at murder and take someone's life. There's a whole sequence of things that happen further upstream that Jesus would suggest starts with anger that's not dealt with. Stuff that bugs you that's not handled appropriately. Something that you ruminate on and you rehearse, and someone hurts you and you don't take care of it. You hurt someone else and you blow it off. It starts way upstream, long before you get over here. This takes time. It sometimes takes effort. It takes maybe negligence. It takes a variety of things to get to this place of murder, which is so serious, and we would say absolutely that's wrong. Upstream from murder, we learned last week, is something called contempt, which is simply looking at someone else as a devalued, not significant, don't matter, maybe even as far as worthless or worth less than I am. And that is what is upstream from murder. Upstream from contempt is someone who curses someone else. And upstream from cursing is someone who calls someone a fool. And upstream from calling someone a fool is unrestrained, nurtured anger. And that starts with small offenses oftentimes. Sometimes that space is short, sometimes it's longer, but there is a space. So what Jesus is saying to us is you deal with anger not when you have the gun in your hand or the knife in your hand. You deal with it way upstream, maybe years before. And he is trying to build a community of people who deal with those things in their world up here. What would it look like to be part of a community, of a family, if you will, who experienced anger because that's part of the human reality, but rather than let it go to get over here, they all just agreed to with one another, no, we're going to deal with it way up here. This is where we're going to handle it. Paul at one point writes, he says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Well, that would be a daily thing. Sun sets every day. Yeah. Again, deep stuff that you get when you come here. I know that. So this is what Jesus is now going to apply to the area of human sexuality and to adultery. And he would say, you don't just arrive at adultery just like that. There's stuff that happens. There's things that aren't looked after. There's something going on upstream over here that if it's not taken care of, it's not recognized maybe, this is where it can lead. Not necessarily, but every time it starts, it ends here, it started there. It doesn't always start there and end there, but if it gets there, it started up there someplace. And this is what Jesus is speaking about. Same pattern. You have heard, and so we agree, do not commit adultery. This is how verse 28 goes. But I say, anyone who looks at a woman, up here stuff, right? Anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery over here with her in his heart. To which we say, hold on. If looking at a woman results in thoughts of admiring her beauty, and that is lust, and lust is the precursor to adultery, as Jesus seems to say, yikes. And just so that the guys, just so that we can all swim in the same sleazy cesspool of sexual sin, if that's the standard, is there any male here who's not an adulterer this morning? It's easier if you would identify yourself than those that are. Right. And so the temptation, when we read this in our culture, and even to a degree in Christian subculture, is either to write Jesus off as out of touch, a prudish moralizer, or slide into deep, dark abysses of shame and guilt. Either way, and to some degree either one, causes us not to think seriously about what Jesus might really be saying, and as a result, take what he says way too lightly. Jesus actually knows what he's talking about. As I said, he is not naive, he's not narrow-minded, he's not a Puritan, he's not a moralizer. He invented human sexuality, and he knows how it is best expressed in the most fulfilling and intended way. He just knows. And he quickly recognizes lesser expressions and is especially adept at recognizing inferior substitutes, but does not take a condemning tone, but rather has a redemptive, replenishing perspective to what this is all about. So just to clarify, Jesus is not talking about here, first of all, he's not talking about lust being an appreciation of beauty, even physical beauty. Do you know there are beautiful people in the world? This is a good thing. It really is a good thing. God thought so. Take you all the way back to Genesis 1. God saw all that he had made, and it was good, and then he made human beings, and he thought it was very good. And the temptation is to look at that and go, of course, he's got a father's heart, a creator heart. He thought it was grand what he had created. Actually, the word good in the Hebrew is an aesthetic term. It meant he looked at what he had created, and he said, that's physically beautiful. I like what I've made. I'm drawn to the beauty of what I have made, the physical beauty. They're pleasing to my eyes. So to look at a woman or a man, ladies, and find them attractive or pleasing to the eye is not lust, and it's not adultery. That is not what Jesus is saying here. The second thing he's not saying is that momentary flash of sexual desire is lust or adultery, if you will. When you see a woman or a man, even or because they're wearing very few clothes, that is temptation. We have to be careful not to confuse temptation with lust. Just this week, as I was studying for today, I Google searched some information around lust. Right, that was my first mistake. I should have known better. It might not have been quite as dangerous as it turned out to be, except that I searched for the actual biblical term here, which I'll mention in a little bit, which is to looking for lust, looking to lust. So Google did exactly what they thought I was asking for, that I was looking to lust. Yeah. I found myself beginning to be a little curious when something happened. Up popped on my screen a sidebar with some pictures of modestly clad, barely clad, truly, ladies, and some YouTube options that I could look at down the bottom. Now, of course, your pastor just clicked really quickly and went, no way, not over here. Nope, something neurological and biological happened inside of me. I love my wife. I am not looking anywhere else. I'm not interested. I have had my own slip-ups in my own journey in my life. But something happened neurologically, biologically. when those images popped up. At a neurological, biological level, I became curious and I became attracted, and it grabbed hold of me. I don't know the woman that was in the picture. I don't know her name. I knew nothing about her. But at a deeper level, there was something that said, take a further look. Now, the initial impulse to do that is not sin. That's temptation. We cannot prevent temptation nor avoid it completely, but we can influence it. We can. By watching what images and ideas we flood our minds with, as crazy as it sounds, by getting sufficient rest and limiting the intake of certain beverages and even foods and a bunch of other factors, we can influence it. This is how it's been for humanity for very many years. 500 years ago, when one of our forefathers, Martin Luther, was writing about Matthew chapter 5 and his own thinking of this, he must have been a bit uncomfortable because he told a joke that would have caused people to laugh 500 years ago. Let me tell you Martin Luther's joke, okay? I'm not a great joke teller. Martin Luther might have been far better at this, but this is what he writes. He says, "We should not make the bolstering of Jesus' teaching too taut here, as if anyone who is merely tempted to look at another with lust is eternally damned. I cannot keep a bird from flying over my head, but I can certainly keep it from making a nest in my hair or biting my nose." And everyone would have gone, "Oh, Martin Luther, that's so funny. You're such a kidder." But he was saying, exactly, I can't prevent that, but I can prevent it going further. And this is what Jesus is saying. So if it's not that, what is this thing that Jesus is speaking about? What Jesus is talking about is a lingering look at a woman to get sexual gratification from her body, using her visual presence as a way of savoring the fantasized act, is lust. It's on the screen. A lingering look at a woman to get sexual gratification from her body, using her visual presence as a way of savoring the fantasized act. Stop for just a second. Why does it just talk about dudes? I think there might be some ladies that struggle in this or think this or deal with this. Can I stop for just a second? Because we're going to be true to the text. The text talks to guys. So guys, I'm not putting you on the spot. I want to be true to the text, and it isn't talking about women. I may get to that at the end, but this is talking about us. He's talking to us guys. And when we take a lingering look at a woman to get some sexual gratification from her body, using her visual appearance as a way of savoring the fantasized act, Jesus is saying, that's lust. And that's wrong. And that's damaging. And that's a slippery slope. Jesus is saying that lust is something other than appreciation of physical beauty and a momentary flash of sexual desire. Unfortunately, the New Living, which we put up here, and if you're a fan of the New International, they get it close, but not exactly right. The actual terminology would be looking at a woman to look to lust with the purpose of. So if you look at the word look, it could mean anything, just a passing glance or a lingering gaze. The actual word that's used in the New Testament Greek is a lingering look with a purpose, which is what the to preposition in there is. It's to, for the purpose of. So a lingering look to lust. We don't use that term very much. It's hard to open up the New York Times and find that word in there. It tends to be a religious word or in religious circles. But what it means is sexual gratification. So looking to a woman's body for personal sexual gratification is what the biblical definition that Jesus is trying to point to. It's what happens after the appreciative glance at beauty. It's what happens after the flash of sexual desire. It's the lingering look back several times. The replaying of a scene in your imagination. It's the imagination of yourself participating in the actual scene. And rather than override the sexual attraction you're experiencing, you do or think something that enhances and advances it. You give into it. Similar to anger last week, it seems so innocent and no big deal. You laugh it off as natural. Everyone deals with it. It's Jesus says, I don't think that way. That's not consistent how I see it. I want to say this. If you are a woman and you have experienced this kind of look to lust from a man, you know that it is significant. And it ought not to be laughed at or taken as just boys being boys. That's not how Jesus thought about it. If you've ever been a perpetrator of that kind of look to lust experience, and the road that it may have started you out on as a young man has led to some really dysfunctional things sexually, you know that it's a serious thing. You know that it leaves damage. But what may be hidden here, or not so clear immediately anyways, is why it's so significant to Jesus, who created human sexuality, that he associated the look to lust with what we all agree is the unacceptability of adultery. Why does he go there so? Now, at the core of Jesus' teaching is this idea that comes out over and over again in so many of Jesus' teachings and stories and encounters. It's one of the core ideals of his world. It's this: the core value in Jesus' thinking is the absolute treasure and immeasurable value of every single human being. You'll never get him to deny that. You'll never get him to push back. He will defend that in the face of great opposition, where every single person is of huge value and a treasure, not because of what they do or don't do, not because of what they become or they don't become, not because of the wrecked life they might have or don't have, or the pristine life they have. They simply, by being alive, are of immeasurable worth and treasure to him, period. And he'll never change that view of us. Never. And it's against that backdrop that Jesus thinks about adultery. To Jesus, adultery is this: it's the dehumanization of people Jesus thinks are of immeasurable worth and value. In this case, the objectification of women. And he won't stand for it. Because to do that dehumanizes women. And it actually dehumanizes ourselves, guys. And Jesus looks at that and goes, you want me to go okay with that? No, I'm so concerned about it. Let's roll this all the way back over here at the start, because I can't imagine going there. We have to do what we have to do to not go there. Now, he's written this to men, and to be fair, it can work both ways. Women can look to lust after men, and it's a simple correlation to what Jesus says to men for women. But the text speaks of men, so let's carry on with that. Now, here's the problem. This is not primarily about the sexual desire of the human body. Jesus is not opposed to that. He created it, whether it's male or female. These are, once again, to quote God's words, our bodies are wonderful to God. The sexuality within him is wonderful to him. In fact, till sin entered the world, the human body was naturally fully naked and lust-free. That's how God made it. Thought it was wonderful. No, it's not to have a view of the body that needs to be mortified or covered up or put a veil on it in public, or to be masochistic or beat the body or bring it into submission. That's not Jesus' concern. The problem is when we turn, particularly men toward women who fit our cultural definition of beauty. The problem is when we, particularly men toward women who fit our cultural definition of beauty, when we turn them into objects, into things, into fuel for our sexual desire or the satisfaction of them. It is also a problem when those who don't fit our cultural definition of beauty, and we don't talk much about this, but we marginalize them, and we shame them, and we malign them because they're not physically beautiful. Marketers do that. Our culture does that. Apprentices of Jesus do not do that. That is treating people like objects and things, and Jesus will have none of it. When we objectify others who fit or don't fit our cultural standard, we dehumanize the very people Jesus so treasures and values and sees of immeasurable worth. And this is to satisfy our own sexual desires. What? And in so doing, we do not only dehumanize them, but we dehumanize ourselves, and frankly, it breaks the heart of our Father. This runs deep inside of us, and Jesus knows it. This is why he describes adultery not just as adultery, but he describes it as adultery where? In our hearts. Verse 28 again says, adultery with her in his heart. What does it mean, adultery of the heart? Again, look, nobody wakes up in the morning and accidentally looks with lust or commits adultery. It just doesn't happen that way. I talk to many couples whose marriages are a full-blown crisis, and because someone has had an affair, and often I will hear this: I wasn't loved for 15 years, and finally I'd had enough. And then I found someone who took interest in me, and my love shifted. I hear this: I started looking at soft porn when I was a teenager, but soon that no longer excited me. And I needed something more and further out there to excite me, and then that didn't satisfy me anymore, and then it got really gross. And this is what I hear. See, it doesn't just happen. You don't just start out one day. It's often months, years, even decades in the making. But it typically starts with a lingering gaze, a flirtatious conversation, a curiosity click, a desire that a desire that is responded to, a sexual desire that's responded to and teased, rather than recognized for what it is. And most times it happens because we've confused lust and love. This is a hard thing for our culture to figure out. It actually always has been. I think it's just exacerbated in our current culture, where we've kind of lost our moral compass. There aren't moral absolutes so much anymore. And so we get all messed up and it gets gray. What's love? What's lust? Paul writes a letter to some friends at a church at Corinth one time. And in that letter, he tries to describe what God's love is like for them. Often it's read at weddings. It's not actually intended directly for weddings. It's okay, but it's not intended for that. It's 1 Corinthians 13. What's the first thing that Paul writes about a description of God's love? What's one of the first characteristics? Love is patient. Love is patient. Love takes its time. Lust, right now. There's a difference there. If the lingering desire is one to get satisfaction immediately, you got to think, is that love? Love is selfless. It looks for the good of the other, no matter the cost. Lust looks after my interests. Love is a decision, a repeated decision. Lust is desire. Almost without a decision, though there is a decision. And Jesus is saying the problem is never just a physical act. The problem is deep inside the heart of our being, our mind, our emotions, our body, our soul. And most times nobody around you actually knows, because it's one of those hidden kinds of things till it accidentally comes out. So what is the way out? And with Jesus, there's always a way out. Right? Right? Right. Here's what he says. Probably says this, right? You must not lust. Stop it. Stop objectifying women. Stop with porn. Stop with sex with anyone other than your spouse. No, Jesus is much more realistic and down to where we live and fail and try again. He gets us. And what he offers is a few basic training and restraining steps, some basic baby steps, if you will, for us, so that we can live thriving lives in his kingdom and in the community he's trying to create. But they might surprise you just a little bit. If not, they might make you laugh. For sure, there's a good likelihood you'll just write them off and go, oh, he's just being overstating things. This is what he says. Verse 29, so if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your eye, or your hand rather, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. So if you're new to the Bible, you're going, what? What? So to help all of us out with this, we're starting a new ministry. Its inaugural meeting is tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock in this auditorium because we think we'll need the space. We're calling it Body Part Removal Ministry. We'll have professionals here to help you safely detach various body parts. We've arranged to have several doctors and nurses on hand to assist, along with a local veterinarian, and the meat counter guy from Fry's will also be here. You can bring your own scissors, knives, power tools, whatever your preference is, but we're rooting sin out of our lives here tomorrow night. You want to be here, at least as a spectator, if nothing else. You know, we take Jesus' teaching seriously, and evidently, absolutely, literally, in all instances, right? No, actually. Jesus is not talking about literally removing body parts as a fail-safe effort to remove adultery and contempt and lust and rampant sexual desire from our lives. If he was, he missed mentioning the most obvious body part. Right? Many years ago, I got an early morning call from a man asking if I could visit his brother in the local hospital. He asked if I could visit Ken in the psych ward of the hospital in our city. I agreed, but I was unprepared for what I encountered. Ken told me his story. Ken was the editor of our city newspaper, but had a secret life fighting a losing battle with pornography. He would go through days of saturated use and in the inevitable cycle of guilt and shame, and some of us in this room know exactly what he was feeling. The most recent cycle in his life had taken him to new lows of both trying to find satisfaction and also the shame with it. He was absolutely desperate. And then, as happens, he read Matthew 5. So in an effort to bring an end to his desperate cycle, that day before actually, he had driven to the hospital, parked out in front of the emergency department. Now, I hesitate to tell the story because it is PG-13, so I tell it without graphic detail. He sat in his car and he took out a utility knife and he began to cut away at his genitals. At some point, the pain got too great for him and the blood was too much. He stumbled out of his car, made his way into the emergency department. They immediately attended to him. They got him stabilized in one of the trauma rooms, waiting for a surgeon to come and make some repairs. And Ken decided to get out of bed, walk to the public bathroom, and finished what he had started with a knife that he had brought into the emergency department with himself. He was found in the bathroom, passed out in a pool of blood. Ken made it through that. But as you can guess, it's nearly impossible to recover psychologically from that. In the years following, Ken would tell me that apart from the loss of some neurobiological changes in his sexual desire, he still had the same thoughts and the same compulsion. Removing a body part had little effect. So is Jesus suggesting we literally do what Ken did? No. No. This is hyperbole. It's said for the sake of a shock effect to help those who are listening then and today to grasp how serious and basic the starting point is and how corrosive it is to all of us and how it's not part of a truly good person's life. What he's saying is you must deal drastically with lust. Deal with the first signs of it. When temptation threatens to turn into action, when the lingering gaze and the second and third look happen, when you put on something that catches his or her attention to show off your physical attributes, take drastic and consistent steps then. Amputate that part of the condition. Don't shrug it off. Boys will not just be boys. Don't manage it. Don't rationalize it. Take drastic action over here. That's his point. That's what he's trying to say. Jesus says that if you don't, you run the risk of leading to a sort of hell. Now, don't think lake of fire, okay? Think of the crippling guilt and shame of committing adultery against your spouse and keeping it secret, and how that erodes the transparent intimacy and trust that you just don't have anymore. Even if she doesn't find out, you still know. Think about being intimate with her and sharing those moments with her, and all the images and resulting comparisons flood into your mind while you're sharing that moment together, because they're stored up in the viewfinder of your mind. Think of her stumbling across your search history or catching you late at night and all that comes with that betrayal. Think about someone objectifying, thinking about your daughter or your wife as a thing to be used for their sexual pleasure. Tell me that isn't a form of hell. Those are hellish thoughts, and a way to often have a way of becoming hellish realities. And Jesus says, do something drastic before it leads there. Jesus is saying, you don't get there or to where Ken ended up in a moment or an instant. It starts way upstream from there. This is one of the most difficult teachings of Jesus, especially for men. Because guys, if you've struggled here, I don't know if the stats are right, but it's a shocking stat. You think it's impossible because you've gone through that cycle often enough. I'll never do it again. And then there's a period of time that passes, and you find yourself in front of that screen or on your phone, and there it is again. And you feel sick about yourself, and you don't think God could ever love you, and it'll never get fixed. It'll never get healed. That is not Jesus thinking either. It is difficult, but it's not impossible. You see, this is a habit of the mind, not the law of gravity. And Jesus is saying throughout this talk on the hillside near the Sea of Galilee that the flourishing life and becoming a truly good person is possible for everyone who moves toward him and his kingdom. It is. It's going to take some things, however. It's going to take some teachings from Jesus and his sexual ethic, kind of like we've talked about today. It's going to require rethinking what exactly each of our sexual ethic is. It's going to require practice in an environment where there's grace, because failure can be part of it. It's going to take being part of a trusted community around us. It's going to take different and effective spiritual training, exercises, and patterns, and it's going to take time, and more than anything else, it's going to take the power of God's Spirit inside of us. And if you've never invited him to be in the center of your life, this is a battle I don't know you can win. But with his power, with becoming a new person, having his values increasingly, it can happen. It can. It will take some deliberate action, drastic action. Even some things that will initially seem so drastic and ridiculous as gouging out your eye or cutting your hand off seem. It means maybe not going to certain movies when all your friends are going, and you're going to explain why. It means only using your smart device when your spouse can see what you're actually watching. It means confessing, see, this is crazy, I'd rather cut my hand off. Confessing to a trusted friend just how deep you've gone and how hard the battle is for you. Who does that? We just keep it secret, guys. It means replacing your fully connected phone with an old-style flip phone. That's just ridiculous, isn't it? That's like stupid. Who does that? Someone who says, I am not going there. I just heard of it this week. A guy went back to a 19 whatever it was flip phone because it was his way of saying, that's a drastic step I'm going to take. It might mean, get this, shutting off your Wi-Fi at home. Again, I'd rather cut my hand off, right? It means removing certain apps from your phone. It means never being alone with your girlfriend, ever being alone with her in a place where this could go someplace where you would end up using her to satisfy yourself. Here's an option. I want to put a couple of websites up on the screen. These are a couple of places you could go. These are organizations and groups that are dedicated to help dudes get free from this compulsion of objectifying women. You might want to check it out. I'll leave those up there for a little bit. You can secretly write them down or memorize them. So what do? I need help here, right? So this morning, if you want to slip me a piece of paper on the way out in the plaza, it'll just be between you and me. If you want to write me an email, it's brad@copperhills.org, and it'll just be between you and me. But maybe there's a large enough group of guys here that would say, I need to do something drastic. I need to talk to someone about it, and maybe I need to talk with some other guys about it. I need to rethink this, not just with Jesus, I do as well. But I need some other guys around me who are fallen like I am, who struggle like I do. And maybe together we could help one another and do something drastic. Butch, why don't you come on? We're going to sing a song. And I picked this song today because my hope is that it would give you some hope in this area. The words are, you'll pick this up. Jesus knows our strength is small, and he paid the price for that. Here's a line. You're not going to understand this if you're not familiar with this old-time hymn. It says, he can change the leper's spots. It's not the leopard. It's the leper. It's somebody in the first century who had a skin disease that couldn't be treated and could prove ultimately to be fatal for them through infection. And what the writer of the song is saying, what was thought to be unhealable can be healed. It says, Jesus died my soul to save. There's hope, guys. Maybe some drastic action. Would you stand with me? Jesus. My heart is so heavy for the guys in our church today. I don't know the stories. I know a few of them. You know them all. And you do not condemn us. But you recognize less than and a lesser path. And you want us to live the flourishing life. And you want to help us then. So would you help us? Thank you that you paid it all. That obstacle is gone. That guilt and shame are carried away to your cross, covered by your blood. But you expect us to do something. To be honest and to do something really drastic if that's needed. So help us even as we sing this. Bring freedom and even joy into our family this day.